In 1934, if you walked into a bank in the Midwest, the teller behind the counter wasn't worried about getting robbed by some guy with a note. He was worried about getting robbed by a man with a Thompson submachine gun, wearing a bulletproof vest, and 4 friends standing out front with more of the same. And worse than that, there was a real possibility he was about to spend the next 20 miles of his life standing on the side of a running board of a getaway car with the wind in his face and 6 outlaws between him and a police bullet. This was the public enemy era, and the men doing this were not amateurs. I'm Mr. V, and welcome back to the Hidden Lens. Today we're going into the wildest and the dumbest and the most flat-out unbelievable bank robberies of the Great Depression. Not Bonnie and Clyde. We've covered them 6 ways from Sunday, and they were small time when it come to actual bank robberies. Back today, we're talking about the heavy hitters. The guys who hit 2 banks in one day. The guy who broke out of an escape-proof jail with a piece of wood. And the gang that turned downtown Sioux Falls into a Sunday matinee shoot-'em-up. Let's start in Oklahoma. November the 1st, 1932, in a town called Sallisaw. Pretty boy Floyd, his friends called him Chalk, not Pretty Boy because their boat didn't float that way. That nickname was something the newspapers slapped on him and he didn't like it. Floyd rolls in to his own hometown with George Birdwell and Ossie Elliott. And he walks into a bank where half the town people knew him by sight. He's not wearing a mask. He says hello to people on the sidewalk on the way in. And when he comes out with $2,530 in cash, nobody calls the cops because half the town is silently rooting for him. The locals had a name for him. They called him the Robin Hood of Cookson Hills because the rumor going around, and we don't know if it was really true, but the rumor was good enough for the people who believed it. And that was that Pretty Boy Floyd would tear up the mortgage papers when he robbed a bank. So if you owed the bank $1,400 on your farm and Pretty Boy Floyd came through, your debt would go up in smoke because he would set the papers on fire and burn them up. The Great Depression had bank foreclosing on farms faster than the courthouses could keep up with the paperwork. People watched their homes get auctioned off on the courthouse steps while they still had the dust of their property still on their boots. So when a guy in a sharp suit walks in with a Tommy gun and puts a match to the long ledger, he wasn't a criminal in their eyes. No, sir. He was a one-man court of appeals. Most modern historians say the mortgage thing was probably exaggerated, but the people of Oklahoma believed it hard enough that in 1931 and 1932, well, he robbed so many banks across the state that bank insurance rates literally doubled. And on December the 12th of 1931, he pulled off what has to be the most efficient bank robbing day of the entire Depression. He robbed the bank in Payton, Oklahoma, and then he drove down the road and robbed the bank in Castle, Oklahoma on the same day. 2 banks, one afternoon, and he used the same Tommy gun. And he was so unbothered about being identified that he often introduced himself by name during the robbery. Just walk on in, walk up to the cashier and say, "Hey, I'm Charles Floyd. Would you mind opening that drawer for me and handing me all that cash?" Well, you try that today and let me know how it works out for you. You'd end up in the pokey or on a mortician's table pretty quick, I would think. Now, the FBI eventually tied Floyd to the Kansas City Massacre, the June 1933 ambush outside a Union Station that killed 4 lawmen and a federal prisoner in broad daylight. Floyd denied it to the day he died, and historians are still arguing about it. But that event is what lit a fire under J. Edgar Hoover and gave the Bureau the political cover to come after men like Floyd with everything they had. It put a special agent named Melvin Purvis front and center on the hunt. And Purvis is a name we're going to come back to because he had a hand in ending nearly every story we're telling today. He's one of the FBI's most badasses. Now, Jump forward to March the 6th, 1934. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The Security National Bank and Trust. This one is so wild that the local newspaper that night had to stack 6 different headlines on top of each other on the front page just to fit the story in. The crew walking in is John Dillinger and a fistful of associates, including a 5'4" fire plug of pure violence named Babyface Nelson. They came in armed with Thompson submachine guns. While they're cleaning out the cash drawers and yelling at the bank president to open the chest, the alarm gets tripped. Now they got a problem because the Sioux Falls cops are on the way. Outside, motorcycle officer Hale Keith pulls up. Babyface Nelson standing on a second-floor window of the bank. He swings the machine gun out and absolutely cuts Keith down before the officer even gets off his motorcycle. The newspaper the next day described Nelson as gloating while he did it. Keith somehow lived, fortunately, which is his own little miracle. But at that time, he was laying on the ground bleeding. So now the bank's a fortress and the gang has to get out. There are 4 of them inside. So what do? They grab 5 employees on the way out. Mildred Bostick, Emma Kabach, Mary Lucas, Alice Belgian, and Leo Olson. All of them, they made them stand on the running boards on the getaway Packard. Now, when I first encountered people saying that guys drove a Packard, I had to look into it and see just what a Packard was. I envision a pack mule, but Outlaws in the 1930s ain't gonna get too far with one of those things. So what is a Packard? Well, a Packard was a premier American luxury automobile brand that operated from 1899 to 1958. It is re-owned for the craftsmanship. The Detroit-based company built cars favored by the royalty, presidents, celebrities, rivaling the prestigious European brands like the Rolls-Royce. And apparently it was the getaway car for this bank robbery. When I see this kind of car, I have a nickname for it. I call it a gangster car, because it looks like a gangster car you see in movies. So these folks are packed in and on the Packard. And the ones that are on it are standing on the running boards. Now, that's a little strip of metal that runs along the underneath side of the doors. It's about as wide as a shoe. So you got 5 people clinging to the side of a getaway car with the wind hitting them in the face and police shooting at the car that they're physically attached to. They were what I would technically call bullet stoppers. The gang got out with $46,000 in cash. The hostages on the running boards eventually got dumped on the side of the road and walked back into town during the cold weather. And now for the record, about 2 weeks before Sioux Falls, the same core group had shot up a little resort in northern Wisconsin called the Little Bohemian Lodge, trying to dodge the FBI raid. Melvin Purvis's men accidentally gunned down 3 innocent civilians in the dark while Dillinger and Nelson slipped out the back. The disaster embarrassed Hoover so bad that he made the manhunt personal. So by the time of Sioux Falls, these men had the full weight of the federal government pointed directly at them. If this one's sticking with you so far and you want me to keep digging into stories Hollywood doesn't tell, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and the hype button before they get away from you, because what's coming next makes Sioux Falls look pretty organized. A week later, March the 13th, 1934, in Mason City, Iowa, the First National Bank, same crew, more or less, 7 men, 1 Buick sedan, and they were expecting to walk out with $240,000. Well, that sounds pretty good for a few minutes of criminal activity. Well, things happened and they walked away with 52 grand. Why? Because one bank teller named Harry Fisher, who deserves his own statue, well, when the gang came in, pouring in, they were shooting their guns into the ceiling. Fisher had the presence of mind to lock himself in the vault. And when they yelled at him to hand the money out, well, he did. He handed out stacks of $1 bills. The big bills stayed in the back, so here we got Dillinger standing in the lobby with a Thompson machine gun. The place is filling with smoke from gunfire and a tear gas grenade. I'll get to that in a minute. And the bank teller is in the vault behind bulletproof glass, passing out dollar bills like he's making change at the county fair. And speaking of the tear gas, the bank guard, the bank had a guard named Tom Walters who was sitting up in a little elevated booth made of bulletproof glass, fortunately enough for him. So when the gang came in, Walters fired a tear gas cartridge from his perch and hit one of the robbers square in the back. Hate to be him. Think about how that works in 1934. It's basically a small canister that fires out of a pistol grip launcher, and when it lands, it cooks off and dumps a cloud of irritating chemical smoke. So one of the gang members is now walking around the bank lobby, trailing tear gas behind him like he's the lead car in a parade. The other gang members tried to shoot Walters, but they couldn't get through the bulletproof glass protecting him. That same bullet-pocked piece of glass is still sitting in the Mason City Public Library to this day. Now, when the gang finally headed for the door, they did the same thing they did in Sioux Falls. They grabbed bystanders off the street, including a pharmacist named C.D. McCahey. He was standing outside on the sidewalk in his work coat. Why would you be doing that with machine guns going off? I don't know, but he did. And they made him and the others ride on the back of the sides of the Buick. Some accounts put those hostage counts up to 24 people on that one car that day. McCahey later said his thin pharmacist coat was the only thing between him and the freezing North Iowa wind that had started spitting sleet on him about a mile out of town. As they left town, the gang threw the roofing tacks out the windows. Let's stop here. McCahey, didn't your mama teach you how to wear a coat when it gets cold? Okay, that's enough. So they threw tacks out the windows of the car to flatten the tires of any cop dumb enough to give chase. The Mason City Public Library still has some of them tacks today, too. The whole thing went sideways, though, the moment the gang counted the money on the side of the road. Now, I guess they were too excited to wait to get to a hideout to count the money, or maybe that tear gas stuff was still on the dude and they wanted to get a breath of fresh air. Whatever the reason, they started counting the loot on the side of the road, and they only got to count up to $52,000, not the original $240,000 that they expected. So I'm gonna say whoops on that one, right? I'm sure that sucked. Now, the man responsible for that math, Harry Fisher, the bank teller, he was sitting back at the bank, probably needing to change his, he probably needed a clean pair of pants, I'm gonna say. Now, Dillard himself, the conductor of half the chaos we've been talking about. We have to talk about the wooden gun, because if you don't know this story, you're not gonna believe it for the first time. Crown Point, Indiana, the Lake County Jail. January 30th, 1934, they have just dragged Dillinger off of an airplane. The police literally had to fly him in because they thought a train was too risky. And they parked his ass in what the local authorities were bragging to anyone who would listen was what they called an escape-proof jail, also known as the Crown Point Jail. There's a photo where Sheriff Lillian Hawley has her arm around Dillinger, there's probably this one, or this one, like they're at a barn dance. The second one doing this is dance, right? On March the 3rd, 1934, Dillinger walked out the front door of that escape-proof jail with a piece of wood. Yeah, that's not me being cute like the dance thing. He took a wooden block, accounts vary on whether it came from a washboard or a broom handle, and he carved it into the shape of a pistol using a razor blade. Then he blackened it with shoe polish. Then he stuck it in a guard's ribs and said, "Hey, this is Dillinger. If you move a muscle, I'll blow your head off." Well, the guard believed him, and I think I would too if someone had something like that stuck in my ribs. He said, "How are you going to get to the ribs to the head?" All right, I'm done. Dillinger backed his way through the jail, grabbed two actual, not wooden, but two actual machine guns out of the armory. I said, I wasn't quite done. He locked the guards in the cell and walked out the front door. And then, and this is the part that really gets me, he stole the Sheriff Hawley's, he stole her personal Ford V8 right out of the driveway and drove it away singing, and witnesses said he was singing, "I'm heading for the last roundup," when he pulled out of the driveway. He drove that stolen car across the state line into Illinois. That's a whoops, because that was the move that finally made him a federal problem. Driving a stolen vehicle across state line was a federal crime under the Dyer Act, and that's the moment J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI got a real legal hook into John Dillinger. So Melvin Purvis, already hunting pretty boy Floyd, now he adds Dillinger to his hunting list. Dillinger's lawyer later strongly implied, and historians have mostly come to agree, that the wood and gun story was a complete fabrication because the real escape was probably bought with robbery money. But Dillinger didn't care if anybody believed the wood and gun story or not. He wanted the wood and gun story in the headlines because the wood and gun made every lawman in America look like a fool. That was worth more to him than the truth. A couple months before the wood and gun, though, Dillinger and his crew had pulled off the East Chicago job. They walked out with about $20,000 and they killed a city patrolman named William O'Mallory on the sidewalk. But here's the detail I want you to hang on to. Dillinger was wearing a bulletproof vest. Mallory shot him 4 times in the chest with a service revolver and the rounds didn't penetrate. Dillinger then machine gunned O'Mallory dead. The getaway car had armor, steel plating, and bulletproof glass. I guess they learned a few things from that dude that shot tear gas at them from earlier. Imagine being a Depression-era cop, though, on a city paycheck with a .38 caliber revolver and a wool uniform, rolling up on guys wearing body armor and driving a tank. It wasn't fair, and the gang knew it. And that gets us to why these robberies were insane in the first place. It wasn't just the violence or the money, it was the showmanship on top of all of it. These men were operating in a country where 1 out of every 4 working adults had no job. The banks had foreclosed on everything that wasn't nailed down, and the newspapers were the only entertainment most people could afford. So when Pretty Boy Floyd told a teller his real name on the way out, and Babyface Nelson cracked a joke through a machine gun, and John Dillinger sang a cowboy song while he drove the sheriff's car out of town, that wasn't just crime, that was theater. It was a giant middle finger to the institutions that had let everybody else's life burn down. The bankers and the lawmen who wrote the official version of the 1930s, the one where these men were rabid animals and needed to be put down. The people who actually lived through it all, well, a lot of them weren't so sure. That's why a teller wouldn't always sound the alarm, why a town like Sallisaw never gave Pretty Boy up, and why 20,000 people showed up at his funeral when Melvin Purvis and the FBI finally shot him down in a cornfield in Ohio in October 1934. And 3 months after that, in July of 1934, Purvis was outside the Biograph Theater in Chicago when Dillinger walked out of the movies and into a trap. The Public Enemy era didn't end with a dramatic last stand. It ended on a sidewalk under a marquee light with a federal agent in the crowd. They were rooting for the wrong team, and they knew it. Now, if this one stuck with you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment below and tell me which Depression-era outlaw you want me to dig into next. I'm Mr. V, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Hidden Lens.